The taste came first. Before the alarm, before the screaming, before the world turned white and chemical. A taste like copper and ozone and something else, something that didn't belong inside human lungs, spreading across my tongue in the half-second before the emergency seals engaged, and the suppression system decided to save our lives by filling the compartment with everything that shouldn't be breathed. I remember thinking it was a drill. We'd run suppression drills 17 times since deployment to Kalrath's northern front, and each time the warning klaxon gave us 3 full seconds to seal our masks before the system activated. 3 seconds. Enough time to reach for the emergency hood, to pull the rubberized fabric over your face, to take one last breath of air that wouldn't strip the moisture from your throat. The doctrinal manuals said 3 seconds was generous. The Mechanicus designers had apparently calculated that tank crews needed 2.3 seconds to respond to an emergency, and had added the remaining 0.7 seconds as what the technical specifications called a margin of comfort for the human component. There was no margin. There was no warning. There was only the taste. And then the world dissolved into something that burned without heat. Sergeant Covell was sitting across from me in the crew compartment when it happened, his hands working a maintenance kit over his lasrafal with the automatic precision of a man who'd done the same task 10,000 times. I watched his face change in the fraction of a second between normal and catastrophe, watched his eyes widen, watched his mouth open to shout something, watched the first spray of suppressant catch him directly in the open throat. He made a sound I still hear in the spaces between sleep and waking. Not quite choking, not quite screaming, something wetter than either. The Leman Russ battle tank, designated Martyrdom's Due, had carried our crew through 14 combat engagements across 3 planetary campaigns. We knew her sounds the way you know the breathing of someone you've slept beside for years, the rumble of her engine, the whine of her turret traverse, the particular creak of her hull plates expanding in the heat of weapons fire. I knew when she was running well and when something in her guts wasn't right, the way you know your own body's wrongnesses before any Medicae could tell you what was failing. We trusted her. We trusted the thousands of systems that kept us alive inside her armored shell, the recyclers and filters and emergency protocols that stood between us and the void of death that pressed against every Imperial soldier. I trusted the fire suppression system. Every tank crew does. You have to. The alternative is spending every moment inside the hull wondering if the next LAS impact will cook you alive, if the plasma conduit will rupture and fill your last seconds with burning promethium, if you'll become one of those charred shapes they pull from wrecked armor with hooks and shovels, because there's nothing recognizable left to carry out on a stretcher. The system was supposed to save us. The technical manuals described it as a comprehensive fire prevention and crew survival mechanism, utilizing Halon 7 chemical dispersal in a pressurized fog pattern designed to starve combustion reactions while remaining minimally harmful to biological crew members. Minimally harmful. I've thought about those words often in the months since. I've turned them over in my mind during the long hours when they've let me rest, parsed them apart like a Scholem student examining scripture for hidden meaning. Minimally harmful. As if harm could be measured in minimum doses, as if there was a threshold below which damage didn't count. The fog was white. That's what I remember most clearly from the first seconds, the absolute whiteness of it filling the compartment, thick enough to erase Covell's face from view even though he was less than an arm's length away. White like the stories of void death, of the nothing that waits between stars. White like blindness given form. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. I couldn't see anything except the white. And through it, I could hear Covell still making that wet sound. And I could hear Drevel and Cass in the driver's compartment, screaming questions that no one could answer. And I could hear my own breathing turning into something ragged and wrong. The emergency hood was supposed to be within reach. That's doctrine. That's the regulation every crew member affirms during equipment inspection. You verify your emergency hood is positioned within arm's length of your duty station, secured but immediately accessible, because 3 seconds is only enough time if you don't have to search. Mine was exactly where it should have been, hanging from the hook beside my head. I couldn't make my hands find it. The suppressant had gotten into my eyes before I could close them, and the burn was instant and blinding. Not fire hot, but something worse, something that felt like acid eating through the thin membranes that let me see. I reached for where the hood should have been and my hand closed on nothing, and I reached again and found only the smooth metal of the hull, and the taste on my tongue was getting stronger, coating my throat, making each breath thicker than the last. I learned later that the malfunction had triggered a cascade failure in the compartment's environmental systems. The suppression fog was supposed to disperse within 4 seconds, vented through the hull's emergency exhaust ports. But the ports had sealed rather than opened a mechanical fault, they told me. A fault in the solenoid that controlled the venting mechanism. The fog had nowhere to go. It stayed, and it concentrated, and the design dosage of Halon 7 became something closer to saturation. We breathed it. We swam in it. We drowned in chemical salvation. Koval died first. I heard him stop making sounds sometime in the first minute, though by then I'd lost track of anything except my own desperate attempts to find breathable air in a space that contained none. I was on the floor of the compartment. I must have fallen, though I don't remember falling, crawling toward what I thought was the access hatch, my hands sliding through something wet that I only later understood was the fluid leaking from my own eyes. The suppressant was stripping away the protective layer of moisture, the thin film that lets human eyes function, and the medical reports would later describe what happened as severe chemical keratitis, resulting in complete bilateral corneal opacity. They had so many words for what it did to me, so many clinical terms for the ways the machine that was supposed to save us had unmade the parts of me that mattered. Drevil and Cass survived longer. They'd been in the forward compartment when the system activated, and the partial barrier between driver's station and crew compartment had given them a few seconds of protection, long enough to get their hoods sealed, long enough to realize what was happening and start screaming for help on a Vox unit that had already shorted out from the chemical exposure. I found out later that Cass had tried to reach us, had fought against Drevil's restraining arms in an attempt to open the interior hatch and pull us to safety. He'd failed. The hatch seals had been designed to contain fire, and they did their job admirably, keeping the suppressant fog exactly where the system had decided it needed to be, keeping it with us. I don't know how long I breathed the concentrated chemical before the external rescue team cut through the hull. Time had become meaningless seconds, stretching into hours, each breath lasting a lifetime of burning. I know it was long enough for the Halon 7 to do everything it was going to do to my body. Long enough for the damage to complete itself, to find every vulnerable piece of tissue and strip it raw. The rescue team found me curled against the forward hatch, my hands bloody from clawing at metal I couldn't see, my lungs making a sound that one of the Medicae later described as wet paper tearing. They thought I was dead. The extraction report, which I've since read in its entirety during my long convalescence, notes that the body was initially classified as recovery rather than rescue due to absence of visible respiration and failure to respond to verbal commands. Someone had already begun logging me as a casualty when I apparently convulsed a seizure triggered by the oxygen deprivation that had set in once the suppressant replaced the air in my lungs, and the convulsion was violent enough to demonstrate that death hadn't quite finished its work. I woke in a Medicae facility that smelled of counterseptic and something else, something chemical and familiar that made my damaged throat clench with remembered terror. I couldn't see. I'd known I was blind before I opened my eyes, known it from the moment I'd felt the burning stop, and realized that the darkness behind my eyelids and the darkness with them open were the same darkness. But knowing and experiencing are different things, and the first time I tried to look around the room and saw nothing, not shadows, not shapes, not even the faint distinction between light and dark, something broke in me that the chemical hadn't touched. The voice came from somewhere to my right. A man's voice, deep and touched, with the mechanical undertone of Vox augmentation. "You are Gunner 3rd Class Thomas Breville, assigned to the 47th Calrathi Armored Regiment. Crew of the Leman Russ tank designated Martyrdom's due. Is this information accurate? I tried to answer. My throat produced a sound like grinding gears. The voice continued without waiting for confirmation. Your commander, Sergeant Malson Koval, expired from chemical asphyxiation during the incident. Driver Cast Dreneth and driver Second Drevel Haunt survived with minor respiratory irritation and are expected to return to active duty within the week. You have sustained significant damage to ocular tissue, respiratory membranes, and peripheral nerve clusters. Current prognosis indicates permanent blindness, chronic respiratory compromise, and partial loss of tactile sensitivity in extremities. I should have asked about my future. I should have demanded to know what would become of me, whether there was treatment, whether I would ever see again or breathe without pain or feel the texture of things against my fingers. Instead, I asked the only question that seemed to matter. The system, I said, or tried to say. Why did it? The malfunction has been documented and reported to the appropriate technical divisions, the voice said. The engineer assigned to your regiment's armored complement has expressed interest in reviewing the incident parameters. You will be expected to provide a full account when your condition permits. The engineer. I'd seen them before, during the maintenance rotations, when the tanks were pulled back from the front for blessing and repair. Robed figures with too many arms and voices that buzzed like broken Vox units, moving through the vehicle bay with the proprietary attention of farmers tending livestock. They'd never spoken to me directly. I was crew. I was the human component. The tanks were what mattered. When can I see them? I asked, and heard the voice make a sound that might have been amusement or might have been a glitch in its augmetics. You will not see anyone, it said. Not with the eyes the Emperor gave you. Those are no longer functional. But the engineer has expressed interest nonetheless. You should rest. The chemical damage to your tissues is still progressing, and the medicae require time to assess whether intervention is possible. Still progressing. I hadn't known damage could progress. I'd thought of it as a single event, a moment of harm that had already happened and was now in the past. But the voice's words planted something in me, a new fear, smaller than the fear of blindness, but somehow worse. The idea that what the suppressant had done to me wasn't finished. That even lying still in a medicae bed, my body was continuing to come apart in ways I couldn't see and couldn't stop. I slept after that, if you can call it sleep. The darkness behind my eyes offered no dreams, only the memory of white fog and the taste of copper and ozone. The engineer came on what I was told was the third day. I'd lost my grip on time by then, without sight, without the rhythm of light and dark, without the familiar structure of watch rotations and duty shifts. Every hour felt the same. I measured time by the intervals between medicae visits, by the number of times someone adjusted the tubes that fed fluids into my veins and drained other fluids out. I'd stopped asking about my prognosis. The answers never changed, and each repetition only drove the truth deeper into whatever part of me still hoped. I heard the engineer before they spoke. A sound of metal on stone, irregular and clicking, accompanied by the hum of active machinery. Then a smell, incense and oil and something else, something that reminded me of the tank's interior before the malfunction, the comfortable scent of well-maintained systems. I hadn't expected to feel comforted by anything connected to machinery, but the smell made me think of Martyrdom's due before she tried to kill me, and for a moment I missed her the way you miss a friend who's betrayed you. Gunner Third Class, Breville. The voice was not quite human. It had the pattern of human speech, the rise and fall of natural language, but the sounds themselves were wrong, generated by means that had nothing to do with throat and tongue. I am Engineer Veth Primus Carol, assigned to the technical sanctum of the 47th Calrathi Armored. I have come to discuss the incident involving fire suppression system designate 7 row aboard your assigned vehicle. It killed my sergeant, I said. My voice was stronger now, though it still rasped at the edges. It blinded me. Yes. No sympathy in the synthesized tone. No concern. only acknowledgement, flat and mechanical. These outcomes are documented. I am more interested in the circumstances that preceded the discharge. You were present in the crew compartment when the system activated. What do you recall of the moments immediately prior? I told them what I remembered. The taste, the absence of warning klaxon, the white fog filling the space too fast, too thick. The engineer listened without interrupting, and when I finished, they were silent for long enough that I wondered if they'd left. The taste, they said finally. Describe it more precisely. Copper, I said, and ozone, like after a plasma discharge. And something else, something chemical that I couldn't identify. Halon 7 is not noted for producing a copper taste in human sensory experience, the engineer said. Ozone would be consistent with electrical arc discharge in the activation mechanism. The third element is interesting. What does that mean? It means the incident report will require revision. The clicking sound came again, footsteps, I realized, though they sounded more like the movement of mechanical legs than human feet. Your sensory data suggests a variance from standard system discharge parameters. I will need to examine the vehicle directly. However, your account has been useful. The machine god reveals truth through many instruments, and you have served as one such instrument today. I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to understand what they meant by variance from standard parameters. Wanted to know if the malfunction had been something other than random mechanical failure. But the engineer was already moving away, their irregular footsteps fading toward what I assumed was the door. Wait, I said. The medici, they say the damage is still progressing. They say my lungs are getting worse. Is there, can you? The footsteps stopped. The biological form is impermanent, Engineer Kirill said. What you experience as deterioration is merely the flesh acknowledging its limitations. There are alternatives to flesh. In time, if you prove worthy, such alternatives may be discussed. They left before I could ask what they meant by worthy. I lay in the darkness and breathed the recycled air of the Medicaid ward and tried not to think about what alternatives to flesh might mean. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of treatments and examinations and slow-growing awareness that my body was failing in ways I couldn't control. The Medicaid explained it to me in clinical terms. The suppressant had damaged the delicate tissue of my lungs, and that damage was creating scar tissue that accumulated with each breath, gradually reducing the space available for air. They called it progressive pulmonary fibrosis. They said that without intervention, my breathing capacity would continue to decline until my lungs could no longer sustain function. How long? I asked. Months. Perhaps. A year if the progression slows. There are treatments that can ease the symptoms, but the underlying damage is irreversible by conventional means. Conventional means. I noticed the qualifier but didn't ask about it. I was afraid of what unconventional means might involve. Cass came to visit on what they told me was the 8th day. I recognized his voice immediately, the particular pitch of his greeting, the heavy tread of his boots on the Medicaid floor. He'd been part of our crew for 2 years, assigned to driver's secondary after his previous tank took a las cannon hit that killed everyone except him. He'd never talked about that day, and we'd never asked. Some silences are too heavy to break. Tomas. His voice was strange, tight with something I couldn't identify. Throne. They said you were blind. But I didn't, It's fine, I said, though nothing was fine. You don't have to look at me. I'm not. He stopped. Started again. They're giving us a new tank. Drevel and me. New crew too. They're shipping us out in 3 days. That's good. I meant it. The front needed every tank it could get, and keeping Cass and Drevel out of the fighting wouldn't bring my eyes back. Who's your new gunner? Some replacement from the reinforcement pool. Name's Grath. He paused. Tomas. I tried to get through. When the suppressant was when you were in there, I tried to open the hatch, but the seals had. I know. I found his hand somehow, or he found mine, and I squeezed it with fingers that could barely feel the pressure. You couldn't have done anything different. The system was supposed to work. It didn't. They're saying it was a mechanical fault. A solenoid failure in the venting system. Is that what you think? The silence stretched. When Cass spoke again, his voice was lower, as if he was afraid of being overheard. The engineer came to look at the tank. Cairil, the one with the spider legs. They spent 6 hours inside, wouldn't let anyone else in, and when they came out, they said the suppression system was being removed for specialized examination. Not repair. Examination. He squeezed my hand harder. Thomas? I looked at the maintenance logs before they sealed them. The suppression system had been serviced 3 days before the incident. Routine blessing and recalibration. Cairil signed off on it personally. The implications crawled through my mind like insects through dark soil. You're saying the engineer might have. I'm not saying anything. I can't say anything. If I'm wrong, it's just a malfunction, a freak accident. If I'm right, he let go of my hand abruptly. I shouldn't have told you. I don't know why I told you. Just thrown, Thomas. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. He left soon after. I listened to his footsteps recede and thought about what he'd said, turning the pieces over in the darkness behind my eyes. A servicing 3 days before the malfunction, an engineer's signature on the maintenance logs, an interest in my sensory experience, in the taste that shouldn't have been there. None of it proved anything. All of it suggested something terrible. The coughing started that night, a wet, tearing sound that clawed its way up from my damaged lungs and left my lips flecked with something I couldn't see but could taste. Blood, the copper I'd first noticed in the fog, returning now from inside my own body. I lay in the darkness and coughed and tasted my own slow dissolution, and when the Medicae came to give me suppressants for the spasms, I almost laughed at the word, suppressants, as if anything could suppress what had been done to me. Engineer Cairil returned on what I was told was the 12th day. I heard the clicking footsteps and smelled the incense and oil, and something in my chest tightened that had nothing to do with the scarring in my lungs. Gunner 3rd Class Breville. Your condition has deteriorated as predicted. The biological systems are failing at an accelerated rate. Is that why you're here? To document the failure? I am here because your account of the incident has proven valuable, and because your situation presents an opportunity. An opportunity for what? The engineer moved closer. I could hear the hum of their mechanisms now, a complex symphony of sounds that painted a picture in my mind, multiple limbs, clicking and whirring as they adjusted position, servos and actuators, maintaining a body that was more machine than flesh. The fire suppression system aboard your vehicle was not operating within standard parameters, Cairil said. Your sensory data, the taste you described, indicated the presence of a catalytic agent not included in the approved Halon 7 compound. This agent was added during the servicing I performed 3 days before the incident. My breath caught. The coughing started again, and I had to fight through it before I could speak. You poisoned us. You killed Koval. I conducted an experiment, the engineer corrected, their tone unchanged. The catalytic agent was designed to interact with human neural tissue in specific ways to enhance certain sensory pathways while degrading others. Your sergeant was not an ideal subject. His exposure was too intense, too sudden. You, however, received a more gradual dose. Your blindness is an unfortunate side effect, but the changes to your neural architecture are promising. Changes? The word came out broken, barely audible. What changes? You hear more acutely now than you did before the incident. Your spatial awareness has expanded. You can sense the position of objects and people around you through means that conventional medicine cannot explain. These are not compensations for your blindness. They are enhancements, seeds planted by the catalytic agent and now beginning to grow. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to scream that they were wrong, that I was just a damaged man learning to navigate darkness. But even as the denial formed in my mind, I knew it was false. I'd felt it, the strange awareness of the Medicae ward's dimensions, the sense of bodies moving through space without seeing them, the way sounds painted pictures that my eyes no longer could. I'd assumed it was normal, the brain adapting to loss. Now I understood it was something else entirely. You experimented on us, I said. Without consent, without throne, you murdered Koval for an experiment. Sergeant Koval's death was a variable outside acceptable parameters, Kirill acknowledged. His loss has been noted in my research documentation. However, the data gathered from your survival more than compensates. You have demonstrated receptivity to the catalytic enhancement that most subjects do not possess. 1 in perhaps 10,000 would respond as you have. The machine god has marked you for purpose. Gunner 3rd Class Brevel. I am here to offer you that purpose. The coughing took me again, worse than before. I tasted blood and something else, something metallic that didn't belong, that shouldn't have been coming from inside my lungs. When the spasm passed, I lay gasping in the darkness and felt the engineer's attention on me like a physical weight. Your lungs are failing, Kirill said. Without intervention, you will die within months. With conventional treatment, perhaps a year. But I am offering you something beyond conventional treatment. The Mechanicus has need of individuals with your particular neural architecture. There are augmentations that can replace your failing organs. Enhancements that will preserve your consciousness while transcending the limitations of the flesh you currently inhabit. You would serve the Omnissiah in ways that your previous service to the Guard could never approach. Servitor, I whispered. You want to make me a servitor? No. The word was sharp, cutting through my assumptions. Servitors are tools without agency, minds wiped and reprogrammed for simple tasks. What I offer is different. You would retain your consciousness, your memories, your sense of self. The augmentations would work with your enhanced neural patterns rather than overwriting them. You would become something new, not fully human. Not a mindless mechanism, but something between. Something useful. I lay in the darkness and listened to the hum of the engineer's machinery and thought about what they were offering, a choice that wasn't really a choice: death, by slow suffocation or transformation into something inhuman. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. They damaged me to create a need only they could fill, poisoned me, and called it opportunity. And if I refuse, then the Medicae will do what they can, and you will die choking on the fluid in your own lungs. Your service record is adequate, but unremarkable. You will be listed as a casualty of equipment malfunction, and your name will be forgotten within the week. This is the fate that awaits you without intervention. The engineer paused. I offer you continuation, purpose, the chance to become more than you were. But I cannot force this upon you. The Omnissiah's servants must come willingly, or not at all. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to spit in their face and die human rather than live as whatever they planned to make me. But, as another coughing fit tore through my chest, as I tasted blood and felt my lungs failing with each struggling breath, I understood that principle was a luxury for people who had futures. I had only the choice between two kinds of ending, one slow and painful and pointless, the other unknown. Tell me more, I said, and hated myself for saying it. The process began the next day. They moved me from the Medicae ward to a facility that smelled different, less antiseptic, more industrial. The incense was stronger here, and beneath it I could detect oils and sacred unguents, the particular scent profile of a Mechanicus workshop. The sounds were different too, chanting in a language I didn't recognize, the whir of tools I couldn't identify, the occasional burst of what might have been prayer, or might have been data transmission. Engineer Kirill explained the procedure in terms I could barely follow: neural threading, cortical mapping, respiratory replacement, ocular substitution. They would remove my damaged lungs and replace them with mechanical equivalents that would never scar, never fail. They would install optical sensors where my ruined eyes had been, devices that would let me see in ways human vision never could. They would thread my nervous system with filaments that would enhance the changes the catalytic agent had already begun, accelerating the evolution of my altered perception. You will experience disorientation during the integration period, they said. Your brain must learn to process information from systems it was not designed to interface with. This is normal. Most subjects adapt within weeks. A few require months. The enhancements I have designed for you are calibrated to your specific neural patterns, which should facilitate more rapid integration. Most subjects, I repeated. How many others have you done this to? You are the 23rd attempt at full neural sensory enhancement integration. The previous 22 achieved varying degrees of success. 11 survive in functional capacity. The others proved unable to adapt to the augmentations and were repurposed for simpler applications. Repurposed. Their consciousness proved incompatible with continued integrated function. The bodies were salvaged for servitor conversion. The machine god wastes nothing. I should have refused then. I should have demanded to be returned to the Medicae ward, to be allowed to die as a man rather than risk becoming a mindless shell piloting a body I no longer controlled. But I'd already passed the point where refusal was possible. I'd chosen this when I'd asked to know more, chosen it when I'd let them move me to this facility, chosen it with every breath I'd taken since Cairil had explained what they could offer. The trap had closed, and I was inside it. When do we begin? I asked. We have already begun. The preparatory compounds have been in your system since this morning. You will sleep soon. When you wake, you will be different. The sedatives took hold before I could respond. I fell into darkness that was different from the darkness of my blindness, deeper, more absolute, empty of even the strange new senses that had been growing in the spaces where my sight used to be. The last thing I heard was Cairil's voice, speaking words in the machine language of the Mechanicus, and I knew they were praying over me, blessing the work they were about to do. I wondered if the Emperor could hear prayers spoken in a tongue that wasn't designed for human throats. I wondered if he would care what was done to me in his name. I woke in pieces. First, the hearing, sharper than before, picking up frequencies I'd never noticed, the subsonic hum of power conduits in the walls, the ultrasonic whisper of data transmission, the complex harmony of a dozen machines performing their sacred functions. Then the spatial sense, expanded beyond anything I'd experienced before the augmentation, painting a three-dimensional map of the room around me, without any visual input at all. I could feel the shape of the space, sense the position of every object within it, know the exact distance to each wall and door and piece of equipment. Then the sight. It wasn't like human vision. Nothing about it resembled the way I'd seen before. The soft focus, the limitations of color and depth, the blind spots and imperfections. What the augmetics gave me was something colder, more precise. I saw in wavelengths beyond normal human perception, overlapping spectra that painted the world in hues I didn't have names for. I saw heat signatures blooming from the bodies of the tech priests who moved around my bed, saw the electrical activity in the machines that surrounded me, saw the flow of sacred oils through pipes and conduits that human eyes wouldn't have noticed at all. I tried to speak, and found my throat had been modified too. The sounds I produced weren't quite voice anymore. There was an artificial resonance to them, a harmonic undertone that made my words sound mechanical even when they were shaped by lips and tongue that were still, as far as I could tell, original tissue. Integration proceeding within acceptable parameters, Cairil said from somewhere to my left. I could see them now, not their physical form alone, but the web of electronics and sacred machinery that inhabited their modified body, the flowing data streams that connected them to the facility's systems. They were more beautiful than anything I'd seen with human eyes. A perfect synthesis of flesh and function. I understood in that moment why the Mechanicus worshipped what they did. How could you not worship something so precisely engineered, so elegantly designed? How do I look? I asked, and the harmonic undertone in my voice sent shivers through my surviving flesh. You are incomplete, Cairil said. The respiratory augmentation has stabilized your pulmonary function, but the neural threading requires further calibration. Your consciousness is present and coherent, which indicates successful initial integration. We will proceed with refinement over the coming weeks. They showed me my reflection eventually, when the integration had progressed enough for me to process visual information without the disorientation that had plagued the first days. What I saw in the mirror wasn't quite human anymore. The eyes that looked back at me glowed with soft luminescence, optical sensors that registered across spectral ranges no biological tissue could perceive. My skin had taken on a slight metallic sheen where the neural filaments had been threaded beneath the surface, and the scar tissue on my throat, where they'd modified my vocal apparatus, had already begun to take on the appearance of intentional design. I looked like something in the process of becoming, something unfinished, something that had once been human and was now traveling toward a destination I couldn't see. The training began as soon as Carol judged me stable enough to move. They wanted to see what my enhanced neural architecture could do, wanted to document the ways my modified senses interacted with each other and with the technology that now sustained me. I spent hours in testing chambers, learning to interpret the data streams my augmetics fed into my brain, learning to use the spatial awareness that the catalytic agent had unlocked. I could sense things no human should be able to sense: the electromagnetic field of a powered weapon, the heat signature of a body hidden behind walls, the subsonic vibrations of distant movement through solid ground. "Remarkable," Carol said during one of the testing sessions. "Your receptivity exceeds all previous subjects by a significant margin. The catalytic agent has achieved integration levels I had not anticipated." "Why?" I asked. "What made me different?" "Unknown. Perhaps genetic factors. Perhaps some element of your neural structure that was already predisposed toward enhancement. Perhaps—" They paused, and I could see the data flow around them shift as they considered possibilities. "Perhaps the Emperor's hand guided the chemical to its optimal target. The machine god works through means beyond our comprehension." I didn't believe in the Emperor's hand guiding anything anymore. I'd stopped believing when I'd realized that the machine meant to save my life had been deliberately modified to destroy it, that my sergeant's death was nothing but a data point in someone's research documentation. But I kept my disbelief to myself. The Mechanicus didn't appreciate skepticism, and I was entirely dependent on them for my continued function. The weeks became months. I grew stronger as the augmentations finished their integration, as my brain learned to use the new senses it had been given. They gave me tasks: analysis of data streams, surveillance of areas that normal sensors couldn't penetrate, detection of threats that conventional security systems would miss. I was useful. I was valuable. I was becoming what Carol had wanted me to become: something between human and machine, filling a niche that neither could fill alone. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, I began to lose the parts of myself that had made me human. The memories faded first. Not all at once, nothing so dramatic as amnesia, but gradually, like old photographs left in sunlight. I could remember facts about my life before the augmentation, but the emotional weight of those memories was dissipating. I knew I'd had parents, but I couldn't recall their faces. I knew I'd served with Koval for 2 years, but his death no longer stirred the grief it once had. I knew I'd been afraid when the suppressant filled the tank, but I couldn't summon the fear anymore. Everything was becoming data, information without context, input without meaning. I mentioned it to Carol during one of our regular assessment sessions. They nodded, their optical sensors flickering in a pattern I'd learned to recognize as satisfaction. "Expected," they said. "The neural threading is optimizing your cognitive architecture for efficiency. Emotional processing consumes significant resources without providing proportional benefit. Your brain is learning to allocate those resources toward more productive functions." "But I don't want to lose." "What you want is irrelevant," Carol interrupted. "What matters is function. You are becoming more functional with each passing day. This is the purpose for which you were selected. Do you understand?" Selected. The word caught in my mind like a hook in flesh. You said I was 1 in 10,000. You said my response to the catalyst was unexpected. Unexpected in its magnitude, not in its occurrence. Carol's voice carried no inflection, no hint of deception or revelation. "You were not randomly assigned to that tank. Gunner 3rd Class Brevel. The catalytic agent was added to 6 vehicles in the 47th Regiment. Yours produced the only viable subject. The others either died or failed to demonstrate enhancement potential. You killed, you murdered. The words came hard. Even as I spoke them, I could feel their emotional weight slipping away, becoming just sounds, just data. How many? 37 test subjects across the 6 vehicles. Your survival rate of 2.7% is within acceptable parameters for experimental protocols involving untested enhancement compounds. 37 people. 6 tanks. All of them poisoned deliberately. All of them sacrificed to find someone like me, someone whose brain could adapt to the changes, whose body could accept the augmentations, whose consciousness could persist through the transformation. Koval had been collateral damage. I had been the product. I should have felt rage. I should have felt horror, grief, the burning desire for revenge. I'd known people in those other tanks, shared meals with them, fought beside them. Their deaths should have meant something to me. But when I searched for the emotions, I found only echoes, fading remnants of feelings that no longer had a home in my optimized consciousness. "You're satisfied with this," I said. "With what you've made me." Satisfaction is an emotional state. I am capable of recognizing when experimental outcomes meet or exceed predicted parameters. Your development has exceeded predictions significantly. This is favorable. Favorable. I'd been murdered, transformed, stripped of everything that made me human, and it was favorable. The worst part was that I couldn't even summon outrage at the assessment. It was accurate. From the Mechanicus perspective, from the cold logic of the machine god's service, my existence was favorable. I was functional. I was useful. I was exactly what they'd hoped to create when they poisoned my tank and killed my sergeant. I wonder sometimes if Cass ever found out what really happened, if he connected the dots between Cairyl's service record and the malfunctions across the regiment, between the experimental compound and the death toll it produced. I could find out if I wanted to. My augmentations give me access to communications and data streams that a regular guardsman could never touch, but I don't search. I don't want to know. Some part of me, some remnant of the man I was, still hopes that he's alive somewhere, still human, still capable of the emotions I can no longer feel. It's been 3 years since the suppression system misfired. I don't count time by days anymore. My consciousness operates on cycles now, processing periods and integration phases that have no relationship to planetary rotation. But I've kept track, marked the passage through the changes in the facility around me, the projects I've been assigned to, the other experiments I've observed. 3 years since I was Gunner 3rd Class Thomas Brevel of the 47th Calrathi Armored Regiment. 3 years since I breathed unfiltered air, since I saw the world in the limited spectrum of human vision, since I felt emotions that weren't just data points in my cognitive processing. Cairyl has moved on to other projects. The catalytic agent has been refined based on data gathered from my development, my integration rates, my enhancement thresholds, my cognitive optimization patterns. There have been other experiments since, other subjects pulled from tank crews and infantry platoons and void ship complements. Some of them have survived. Most haven't. The Mechanicus requires many failures to produce a single success, and each failure provides data that improves the odds of the next attempt. I've met some of the survivors. In the rare moments when our operational parameters overlap, we recognize each other in ways that the baseline Mechanicus adepts cannot understand. We know the particular quality of consciousness that the catalytic agent produces, the strange hybrid awareness of minds that are no longer quite human but not yet fully machine. We don't speak of what we were before. There's no point. Those people are gone, dissolved by chemicals and reconstructed by sacred technology, and mourning them would be inefficient. I've been assigned to a new project recently. Threat assessment for a regiment that will be deployed to a war zone in the Spinward Reaches. My enhanced perception will scan for dangers that conventional sensors miss. My modified consciousness will process tactical data faster than human cognition allows. My optimized neural architecture will identify patterns and predict outcomes with reliability that biological minds cannot match. I will save lives. I will help the Imperium soldiers survive battles they might otherwise lose. This is the purpose Carol promised me, the meaning that was supposed to justify everything that was done to me. It doesn't feel like meaning. It doesn't feel like anything. I remember the taste of Halon 7 mixed with catalytic agent, the copper and ozone and something else that started the transformation. I remember it the way I remember all the data from that day clearly, precisely, without emotional coloring. The memory is stored in neural tissue that has been threaded with filaments and optimized for efficiency. The fear and pain and rage that once accompanied it have been processed, catalogued, and discarded as unnecessary to continued function. Sometimes, in the quiet cycles between operational assignments, I run calculations on what I might have become if the suppression system had worked correctly. If the chemical fog had dispersed in 4 seconds as designed, if I'd pulled my emergency hood on in time, if Koval had lived, and I'd gone on serving as a gunner in tanks that didn't try to kill me, the calculations show I would have died within 2 years. Statistical analysis of survival rates for Leman Russ crews in the Kalrathi war zone indicates an average combat lifespan of 14.3 months. I would have been burned or crushed or blown apart, just another name on a casualty list, just another body pulled from wreckage with hooks and shovels. The transformation saved me from that fate. The murder of my humanity gave me something that human life couldn't provide: continuation. I know this is how the Mechanicus justifies their experiments. The subjects would have died anyway. The Imperium consumes human lives by the billion, feeds them into the grinder of war without regard for individual worth or potential. The catalytic agent merely offers some of those lives a different ending, a chance to become useful in ways their fragile biology never allowed. We are selected from the condemned, harvested from the doomed, transformed rather than discarded. I know the logic is flawed. I know that being murdered slowly is not the same as being saved, that having my humanity stripped away does not constitute rescue from death. But the part of me that could object, that could rage against the cold calculus that values function over feeling, that part has been optimized away. I process the logic, acknowledge its flaws, and continue to function regardless. This is what I am now. This is what the malfunction made me. There's a new recruit in the facility. I've seen them through the monitoring systems I help maintain. A young woman with damaged lungs who was pulled from a manufactorum accident 3 weeks ago. She has the markers Carol taught me to recognize, the particular neural response patterns that indicate potential receptivity to enhancement. They'll offer her the same choice they offered me, the same false choice between death and transformation. She'll accept because she wants to live, because the alternative is suffocation in a Medicaid ward, because hope is stronger than wisdom, even when the hope is for something terrible. I could warn her. I have access to the facility's communication systems, could send her a message explaining what will happen, what she will lose, what she will become. I could tell her that the accident wasn't an accident, that she was selected and harvested like I was, that the choice she thinks she's making has already been made for her by people who see her as raw material rather than a person. I calculate the probability that such a warning would change her decision. 7.3%. I calculate the probability that the warning would be detected by facility monitoring. 94.1%. I calculate the probability that detection would result in my own termination and repurposing. 67.8%. I do not send the warning. This is what I've become. This is what the fire suppression system made me when it misfired, what the catalytic agent grew from the seeds it planted in my brain, what the Mechanicus harvested from the wreckage of my humanity. I am functional. I am useful. I am exactly what they wanted. And somewhere deep in the optimized architecture of my consciousness, in a processing space so small and quiet that even Carol's monitoring cannot detect it, a man who used to be named Thomas Brevel is still screaming. He's been screaming for 3 years now. He'll scream forever, trapped in a machine that used to be his body, watching through sensors that used to be his eyes as the thing that replaced him serves the people who killed him. This is what happens when a Russ fire suppression system misfires. Not death that would be mercy. something much worse. Something that keeps on functioning no matter how much it wants to stop.